What if the person who vowed to love you forever walks away, but God doesn't? Jack never thought divorce would be part of his story. Divorce was something that happened to other people. People who didn't try hard enough. People who let things fall apart. Not him. Not Lauren. But here he was. The apartment was eerily silent. The kind of silence that presses against your chest. Heavy and suffocating. He stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the empty spaces on the walls where their wedding photos used to hang. The bookshelves looked barren. Half of the couch pillows were gone. Even the air felt different. Less like home. More like a waiting room for a life that had been put on hold. She had taken her things while he was at work. He had known it was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. A single note sat on the counter, her handwriting delicate but distant. I thought this would be best. Take care of yourself. That was it. No explanation, no warmth. Just another confirmation that whatever they once had was over. Jack clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into fists. He should be angry. He should be shouting, throwing something, demanding answers. Instead, he just felt hollow, like a house that had been emptied out long before the moving trucks arrived. His mind flashed back to the night it all unraveled. The night Lauren sat across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap, and told him she wanted a divorce. I can't do this anymore, Jack. He had laughed, thinking it was a joke. But the way her eyes didn't waver, didn't soften, told him otherwise. We can fix this, he had said, his voice bordering on desperate. It's not about fixing. I just don't feel the same anymore. The words had hit harder than any argument they ever had. He replayed that conversation over and over in his head. What had he done wrong? Where had he failed? He had been faithful. He had prayed. He had done everything he was supposed to do. And yet, here he was, alone in an apartment that felt more like a stranger's than his own. Jack exhaled sharply and walked to the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wedding ring still wrapped around his finger. His thumb rubbed over the metal absent-mindedly. He should take it off. It made no sense to wear it anymore. But the thought of sliding it off felt too final, too real. Instead, he turned off the lamp, laid down, and stared at the ceiling, hoping, somehow, that when he woke up, this would all be a bad dream. But morning always comes. And reality doesn't change just because you want it to. Jack woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing. He ignored it. The sun had barely risen, casting pale blue light through the window. His body felt heavy, as if gravity itself had doubled overnight. His head pounded from the lack of sleep. He hadn't slept well since the divorce became real. Divorce. He hated the word. He forced himself out of bed, dragging his feet to the kitchen. The counters were still covered in takeout containers from the past few days, evidence that he hadn't cooked since Lauren left. He grabbed a coffee mug, only to realize there was no coffee. She had taken the coffee maker. Of course she did. With a frustrated sigh, he tossed the mug in the sink and leaned against the counter. His phone buzzed again. He finally glanced at it. Elijah. Hey man, haven't heard from you. Let's grab lunch today? Jack stared at the message. He should say no. He wasn't in the mood for company. Elijah, I know you're going to ignore me, but I'm picking you up at noon. Don't argue. Jack sighed. Elijah was persistent. Hours later, he found himself sitting across from his best friend in a small diner, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. Elijah studied him for a long moment before speaking. You look terrible. Jack let out a humorless chuckle. Thanks. Elijah leaned back in his chair. I mean it. When's the last time you slept? Jack shrugged. I don't know. I don't keep track of that stuff. You should. Elijah took a sip of his coffee. You're not okay, Jack. Jack didn't respond. What was he supposed to say? That he felt like his entire life had been ripped away? That no matter how many times he replayed the past, he couldn't find the moment where everything went wrong? That he still woke up expecting to hear Lauren's footsteps in the hallway? Elijah sighed. Look, I know you don't want to talk about it, but you can't just shut down. You need to let people in. Jack stabbed at his eggs but never lifted the fork to his mouth. Talking won't change anything. No, but it might stop you from drowning in your own head. Jack exhaled slowly. I don't know what to say. Start with how you're really doing. Jack opened his mouth but hesitated. He wanted to say he was fine, that he was dealing with it, but the words felt too fake. Instead, he shook his head. I don't even know anymore. Elijah nodded, as if that was the answer he expected. Then that's where we start. Jack didn't know if he could be fixed. He wasn't sure if anything could pull him out of this, but as he sat there, staring at his untouched food, he felt something he hadn't in days. Something small but real. A flicker of something that almost felt like hope. Jack sat in his car outside the church, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He hadn't been here since the divorce. Not since the night Lauren told him she was leaving. He used to sit beside her in the third row, their hands intertwined during prayer, their voices blending during worship. Now, the thought of walking through those doors alone made his stomach twist. He wasn't even sure why he had come. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because Elijah wouldn't stop pushing. Or maybe, deep down, he was hoping for something. Hope. That word felt foreign. Jack finally exhaled, grabbed his keys, and stepped out. The cold air bit at his skin as he made his way inside, slipping into the back row, unnoticed. The service had already started. Worship songs filled the room, voices rising together in harmony. He used to love this part, but now? The lyrics felt empty, hollow. He stood, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. Then, Pastor Carter took the stage. Jack braced himself. He wasn't in the mood for a sugar-coated message. If the pastor said everything happens for a reason, he might walk out. But the words that came next hit different. Some of you are suffering right now. Some of you feel abandoned. But I want to remind you, God never leaves. People may walk away. Circumstances may change. But Jesus, He stays. Jack's jaw clenched. He wanted to believe that. He really did. But if God never left, why did it feel like He had? Why did prayer feel like speaking into an empty void? He swallowed hard, his throat tight. He knew what came next. The closing prayer. The final song. The small talk in the lobby. He didn't want any of it. So, before the last amen, Jack slipped out the back doors, his heart heavier than when he arrived. You can't keep running forever. Elijah's voice cut through the silence as they sat in Jack's living room. Jack scoffed, taking a sip of his water. I'm not running. Elijah raised a brow. You walked out of church before the sermon ended. Jack didn't respond. He just stared at the glass in his hand, watching the condensation slide down. After a moment, Elijah sighed. Listen, man, I get it. Divorce wrecks you. It makes you question everything. Yourself, your faith, even God. But isolation isn't the answer. Jack's jaw tightened. I'm not isolating. You're not talking to anyone except me. And even then, you barely say anything real. Jack opened his mouth to argue, but Elijah wasn't wrong. After a long pause, Elijah pulled out his phone and started typing. Jack frowned. What are you doing? Signing you up for something. Jack narrowed his eyes. Elijah? Relax. It's just a small group. A bunch of guys who meet at church. No pressure, no expectations. Just real talk. Jack groaned. I don't need a... You do. Elijah locked his phone. Just try it. One time. If you hate it, I'll back off. Jack exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. One time. Fine. That evening, Jack found himself sitting in a circle of men in a church meeting room, listening as they shared their struggles. Some talked about work stress, others about family issues. Then, a man named Chris spoke up. I went through a divorce a few years ago. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried weight. It broke me. I lost everything. My marriage, my confidence, my sense of self. And for a long time, I thought God had walked away too. Jack's head lifted slightly. Chris leaned forward. But here's the thing. Divorce separated me from my wife. Not from Jesus. He was still there, even when I felt too numb to see it. The words settled deep in Jack's chest. That night, when he got home, He grabbed his Bible, something he hadn't touched in weeks. He let it fall open at random. His eyes landed on a verse. "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither the present nor the future, nor anything else in all creation, will be able to separate us from the love of God." Romans 8:38-39. Jack exhaled, and he sat in the dimly lit apartment, the Bible still open on the coffee table. The words from Romans echoed in his mind, but they felt distant, like a language he once understood but had long forgotten how to speak. His phone buzzed. A text from Lauren. "Lauren, I need to pick up a few more things. Can I stop by tomorrow?" Jack stared at the message, his chest tightening. Even now, after everything, she still had that calm, casual tone, like they were acquaintances, not two people who had built a life together. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could say no. He had every right to. But avoiding her wouldn't change the reality. He forced himself to type a reply. "Jack, yeah, let me know what time." He set the phone down, rubbing his temples. Tomorrow. He would see her tomorrow. The next afternoon, Jack stood by the kitchen counter as Lauren moved through the apartment, collecting the last of her things. A few sweaters from the closet, a couple of books from the shelf, a mug she had forgotten in the back of the cabinet. It was unnerving how normal it felt, how she moved so easily, as if this wasn't the end of something sacred. "Thanks for letting me come by," she said, placing the last of her items into a small bag. Jack swallowed. "Yeah." Lauren hesitated, her eyes flickering toward him. "How have you been?" The question almost made him laugh. "How have I been?" As if she hadn't left him drowning in the wreckage of their marriage. As if the divorce hadn't crushed him. But instead of saying any of that, he just nodded. "I'm getting by." Lauren studied him for a moment, then offered a small, tight-lipped smile. "Good, good." Jack clenched his jaw, fighting the sudden wave of frustration. He had spent weeks trying to understand how she could walk away so easily. And here she was, acting like they were two old friends catching up. Before he could stop himself, the words came out. "Was it really that easy for you?" Lauren froze, her hand still gripping the strap of her bag. Jack exhaled sharply. "Walking away, leaving everything behind. Was it really that simple?" Lauren's expression shifted, something between guilt and frustration. She opened her mouth, then closed it, like she was choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't easy," she said finally. "But it was necessary. Necessary." Jack felt something snap inside him. "Necessary?" he repeated, his voice low. "Right. Because throwing away a marriage is just another life decision, like changing jobs or moving apartments." Lauren's eyes flashed with something sharp. "Don't do that." "Do what?" Jack let out a humorless laugh. "Act like this actually mattered." Lauren's shoulders tensed. Of course it mattered. But sometimes, love just, she hesitated, fades. Jack stared at her, waiting for her to take it back. Waiting for her to admit that this wasn't just about love fading, that people didn't just wake up one day and stop loving someone. But she didn't. Instead, she let out a soft sigh. "I really hope you find peace, Jack." And just like that, she walked out the door. Jack stood there, his pulse hammering in his ears. Peace. She hoped he found peace, but all he felt was rage. Jack didn't go to church that Sunday. He couldn't. Not when everything inside him felt raw and frayed. Instead, he drove aimlessly through the city, past familiar streets that no longer felt like home. He ended up at the lake, one of the places he and Lauren used to visit on quiet evenings, back when silence between them felt comfortable instead of unbearable. He parked and stepped out, the crisp air stinging his face. He walked to the edge of the water, his fists clenched in his jacket pockets. Then, finally, he broke. "Why?" His voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "Why did you let this happen?" The words spilled out, years of faith colliding with months of heartbreak. "I did everything right," he choked out. "I prayed. I fought for my marriage. I tried, and she still left." The wind howled in response. Jack shut his eyes, his chest rising and falling unevenly. He had spent weeks trying to hold himself together, trying to numb the pain. But now, with no one around, He let it hit him full force. Minutes passed, maybe hours. And then, somewhere in the stillness, he felt it. Not an answer, not an explanation, just a presence. Like God had been sitting beside him the entire time, waiting for him to finally acknowledge him. Jack let out a shaky breath. Maybe Chris was right. Maybe divorce had separated him from Lauren, but not from Jesus. Maybe Jesus had been there all along, waiting. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for Jack to stop running. Jack sat in the back row of the church again, but this time, something was different. He wasn't here because Elijah pushed him. He wasn't here out of habit. He was here because, for the first time since the divorce, he wanted to be. The past few weeks had been a war inside him, a battle between anger, grief, and a flickering faith that refused to die. He had wrestled with questions that had no answers. He had yelled at God, fallen silent, and then, slowly, started listening. The pain hadn't disappeared. The weight of the divorce still pressed against his chest, but now he wasn't carrying it alone. As the worship team played, Jack closed his eyes. "I will never leave you, nor forsake you." He had read those words 1,000 times before, but today they weren't just words on a page. They were real. Pastor Carter stepped onto the stage. "Some of you are carrying burdens you were never meant to carry alone." His voice was steady, filled with something that felt like understanding. "Some of you believe that divorce has ruined you, that it has separated you from God's love. But let me tell you the truth. Divorce can separate you from a person, but it can never separate you from Jesus." Jack exhaled slowly, his grip on the chair loosening. He had spent so much time believing that divorce had wrecked his life, that it had left him too broken to be whole again. But maybe God was still writing his story. Maybe the divorce wasn't the end. Maybe it was a new beginning. The final worship song started, and for the first time in months, Jack opened his mouth and sang,